It's no surprise that video game prices are expensive, but what if I told you that they were cheaper back in 2005? Welcome to Retronomics, the series that follows price trends in video games, and I know what you're thinking, of course game prices were cheaper back in 2005, but just how cheap? Honestly, there's not a lot to go off besides anecdotal evidence and people's past eBay emails showing just how much they paid, and it's been a challenge to find historic written examples of game prices from any time period prior to 2007 when PriceCharting.com first started tracking prices. But I have this. It's the Generation NEX. What is the Generation NEX? Well, 2005 wasn't just a random time that I picked out of the blue. It was the 20th anniversary of the Nintendo Entertainment System in the United States. And when you get a patent in the United States, it's good for 20 years. Then anyone who wants to can make their own copy of your invention. Meaning that for the first time legally, people were free to make their own systems that played NES cartridges, which was what the Generation NEX was. As a matter of fact, the NEX was the first legal clone system in the United States. It looks pretty close to an NES, just incredibly small. In addition to playing NES games, it also has a slot to play Famicom games, and along with official Nintendo controllers, you can play wirelessly with 2.4 GHz controllers. Sounds pretty amazing, except it wasn't. This is a very early emulation device, and as such, the NEX cannot really play the entire library, like Castlevania 3 for example. While most games did work, it wasn't the second coming of the NES in a compact form factor that the company Messiah was claiming. Nowadays, the NEX is a novelty as being the first legit clone console and nothing more. There's plenty of better clone systems, and of course, there's always the original. So, what does that have to do with video game prices? Well, the instruction booklet came with a checklist of all the NES games with most of their prices, a list of all the Famicom games with no prices, and Nintendo accessories with some prices, and the top 100 rarest NES games and the top 100 most expensive NES games. This was made by Digital Press, a now defunct website that had a database of a ton of games with some prices, but it was mostly a rarity scale. The list doesn't say whether or not the games are complete in box or loose, but based on other pricing magazines that I found around that same time period that do have complete in box prices, I can safely say that these are loose prices. The most expensive game on that list? NES Championship cartridge, naturally, for an eye-watering $999 with the rarity scale of 10 out of 10. And the 100th game on that list, out of 700-ish games, Hatris, clocking in at $8. So to compare to today, out of the top 100 items listed on PriceCharting.com, the 100th most expensive game on that list is $148 loose. That's 1,700 times more expensive than what NES games were back in 2005. Looking at the entire list, prices increased on average 900%. Bonk's Adventure for the NES rose the most percentage-wise. Today, that game goes for about $950 loose. Back in 2005, according to this book, $10. Ouch. Now, not all games rose in the past 20 years. Super Dodgeball was listed as $15 in that book, but Price Charting has it listed for $13.65. So, anytime that someone says video game prices have risen too much, just point to Super Dodgeball. Their argument is invalid. All jokes aside, it is interesting to see what prices were considered back then. In addition to these prices, there was also a rarity associated with each title, something that I personally don't care about. And this guide is actually what I used to start collecting NES games, and one of the points was to collect games you actually wanted to play because some of those games are rare for a reason. Also, the rarity is based on 2005 and not necessarily accurate today. For example, the Aladdin carts were considered pretty rare at the time and ranked a number 7, but that was before a ton of these were found in a warehouse and the price just plummeted. And they are starting to rise again, but I bought that whole brand new set just a couple of years ago for $100, including the Aladdin unit. I took a look at more recent rarity lists from 2019 that I found on videogamesage.com, and there really aren't too many of these lists being maintained, at least for the NES. It's not completely one-to-one, as they are maintained by different people and rarity is kind of subjective, but most of the games are either just as rare as they were back in 2005 or slightly rarer given the popularity of some games that have changed over time. A game like Kid Clown, for example, was ranked as a 5 out of 10 on the rarity scale in 2005, but now is considered a 9 according to the new guide. Obviously, it really depends on what you consider rare. There are plenty of copies of Kid Clown available on eBay as of the writing of this video, and price charting says that there's about 2 sales a month, so it could be initially rare as in terms of print run, but it is readily available, assuming you want to pay $800 for a loose copy of the game in the first place. I actually saw one sell for $425 with an open bid, and I wish more sellers would adopt that practice. But in 2005, rarity really didn't matter as much as the game quality itself, and the prices reflect that. Color a Dinosaur, a game for literal children, being rare but $8 at the time, shows where the priority of game collectors were in 2005. Why collect a bad rare game when you could just collect a good game slightly less rare like Little Samson for $35? Honestly, it's one of my biggest regrets because when I started collecting in 2005, I refused to pay that much for an NES game, and I instead tried to look for lots of games in hopes that Little Samson might be in there instead of just sucking it up and paying for it on eBay because the thrill of the hunt or whatever. But I wasn't going for a full set at the time. I was going for the top 25 most acclaimed games, and at the time, Little Samson wasn't even close to that level. Even today, IGN ranks it at 95 out of 100. And I kind of agree, and I think as time goes on, people try to prop up the game as better than it already is because of how expensive it is. And it is one of those games that is better than the other rarer games, but even then, is it better than Mega Man 2 or Contra? Sound off in the comments down below. Okay. Now let's get to the breakdown of the list by least expensive to most expensive, and I'll include the rarity of the game from 2005 as well. Let me know what surprised you the most, and if you're wondering what about modern prices, well, stay tuned because that'll be its own video coming up in a couple of days. Thanks for staying till the end of the video. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with anybody who might find it interesting. If you're new here, consider subscribing for future content. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at snicktendo. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Super Nicktendo, and I'll see you next time.